October 1st, 2025. The silence over eastern Ukraine shattered before dawn. Columns of smoke rose from Pokrovsk and Chassivar as Russian forces surged forward in one of their most concentrated offensives of the year. Drones circled above the horizon. Armored convoys rolled through the haze. In the distance, artillery thundered like a continuous heartbeat. For those watching the front, it was clear that this was not just another skirmish, but a full-scale attempt to break Ukraine's defense line before winter. Yet behind the smoke and steel, a different kind of battle was taking shape. One defined by precision, adaptation, and endurance. As the dust settled, the question became not who advanced, but what this fight revealed about the future of modern warfare. In the first week of October 2025, Russian command unleashed a sharp increase in operations across eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region, concentrating efforts around the towns of Pokrovsk and Chassivar. The Russian aim was clear: force a breakthrough in Ukraine's layered defense system before winter conditions degraded mechanized mobility. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, noted that Moscow's forces sought to exploit fading daylight and softer terrain to press harder into Ukrainian positions. Prior to the main columns rolling forward, Russian reconnaissance and sabotage units were inserted discreetly behind frontline positions. These small teams were tasked with locating weak points in Ukrainian lines, marking targets for drones and artillery, and disrupting defense coordination. By infiltrating early, the Russians hoped to soften defenders and shape the battlefield in their favor. The ISW described this as a continuation of Russia's emphasis on infiltration missions and irregular penetration ahead of large-scale mechanized thrusts. At around the same time, a formation of 6 Russian armored vehicles, supported by mechanized infantry and FPV drones for reconnaissance and strike support, embarked on a push toward industrial zones and open approaches in the Pokrovsk-Chassivar corridor. This matched a pattern that Moscow had attempted in 2024 around Avdiivka, but this time in greater scope and scale. The vehicles moved along corridors where open terrain allowed rapid advance, but also exposed them to minefields and long-range strike assets. This mechanized axis was part of the broader attempt to collapse Ukraine's front lines by sheer mass and mobility. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence, OSINT, data confirmed a heavy buildup of Russian forces east of Pokrovsk, including supply convoys extending for several kilometers and staging areas visible on thermal imaging. Analysts flagged that the logistic tail afforded to Russian units was extended, making the attacking formations vulnerable to ambush and interdiction. However, the Ukrainian defenders were not passive. Intelligence sharing with Western partners and months of warning about Russian preparations allowed Ukrainian units to preemptively prepare mine belts and designate artillery kill zones in front of their position lines. In effect, Ukraine turned the terrain into a layered trap rather than a static line. These preparations meant that when the Russian mechanized columns advanced, they encountered more friction than the attackers had planned. The combination of mines, pre-registered artillery, and small unit reconnaissance gave the defenders both time and choices. What this means is that the Russian offensive was not simply a massed tank rush. Instead, it involved careful staging, infiltration, mechanized thrusts, and an attempt to exploit a window of weather and daylight. But Ukraine, expecting the move, forced the attackers to fight into prepared defenses rather than meet a broken line. That mismatch between preparation and surprise became the first major signal that the balance of initiative was shifting. In short, the early October offensive showed the Russian command doubling down on mechanized assault amidst familiar terrain, but also exposed the enduring advantage that a well-prepared defender holds. Ukraine's ability to channel the attack into predictable corridors, leverage reconnaissance and mines, and apply indirect fire before the main clash began meant that the Russian formations entered the battle with a built-in disadvantage. Transitioning from this build-up and infiltration phase brings us into one of the most telling duels of the campaign. a Western-supplied main battle tank, meeting a Russian advance head-on in the ruins of Pokrovsk. In early October 2025, Ukrainian forces brought the Western-supplied Leopard 2 main battle tank into the Pokrovsk sector to strengthen the local defense line. This move marked one of the first times Ukraine deployed these advanced German tanks directly in a contested zone within Donetsk. According to a Ukrainian news report, a Leopard 2A4 from the 33rd Mechanized Brigade engaged Russian armored vehicles east of Pokrovsk. The key encounter unfolded when a Leopard 2 advanced into an urban ruin environment identified by intelligence as housing a Russian reconnaissance or sabotage group. At close range, the tank approached a damaged multi-story building, aimed its cannon at the first-floor windows, and fired. The Ukrainian reports say the building's interior was cleared and the enemy group neutralized. This engagement showed the tank's capacity to operate in urban terrain, not just open fields. After accomplishing its mission, the Leopard 2 began a tactical withdrawal. But the exit was far from safe. Russian forces opened mortar barrages and deployed attack drones, one of which struck the rear armor of the tank, while another hit the track. Remarkably, the crew later reported only superficial damage, what they described as a surface-level impact. The tank remained operational and exited the area under its own power. This incident emphasized the robustness of Western-made armor under drone and indirect fire attack. Beyond the immediate tactical success, the deployment carried symbolic weight. For months, there had been heated debate over whether heavy tanks still matter on the Ukrainian front, especially in light of drone warfare and anti-tank guided missiles. The effective use of the Leopard 2 in that Pokrovsk engagement provided a visible counter-argument. If employed with mobility, intelligence support, and combined arms, Western tanks still contribute to battlefield success. Another important dimension of this deployment was its demonstration of Ukrainian adaptation. Bringing a high-end asset into the front line required logistics, crew training, and maintenance under fire. Ukrainian units showed they could integrate the Leopard 2 into a broader system: reconnaissance, target acquisition, coordination with artillery, and withdraw when needed. The success at Pokrovsk was not just about a single tank kill or survival. It was about fielding a complex weapon system in a contested zone and making it matter. While exact numbers of Ukrainian Leopard 2s in active operation remain restricted, open-source data suggest a number of losses and damages across the fleet. According to one summary, as of July 2025, at least 24 Leopards of various models have been destroyed or abandoned, and another 31 damaged to some degree. That fact underscores how risky tank operations remain in Ukraine. Yet the Pokrovsk success shows the value of selective use in strong defensive positions. The choice of Pokrovsk for deploying these tanks also makes strategic sense. The city sits at a transport hub leading into Donetsk Oblast, and a breakthrough there would threaten Ukrainian logistics and defensive depth. By placing Western tanks into that sector, Ukraine signaled a commitment not only to stop the Russian advance, but to turn the terrain into a kill zone for mechanized units. In this engagement, the Leopard 2 did more than destroy a target or shrug off damage. It changed the narrative on the Eastern Front. Russian planners expecting to outgun or outmaneuver Ukrainian armor faced a surprise: a high-end tank paired with drone-aware infantry and prepared withdrawal corridors. The result was an example of how Western armor, when deployed strategically, still plays a vital role. The incident also likely had a psychological effect. Russian crews watching a flagship tank acting under fire may reassess their expectations of Ukrainian capacity. In summary, when the Leopard 2 entered the Pokrovsk fight, it did so not as a showpiece but as an integrated tool in Ukraine's defense architecture. It cleared an enemy reconnaissance group, withstood drone and mortar fire with minimal damage, and reinforced the broader narrative that defense is still viable even under heavy pressure. With that success logged, the next challenge awaited further east in the factories and wreckage of Chassivar. In mid-October 2025, a major Russian mechanized column attempted to force its way into the industrial zone of Chassivar in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. The assault comprised 6 armored personnel carriers, APCs, backed by infantry units and drone support, aimed straight at the heart of the city's factories, warehouses, and mining infrastructure. The choice of this target reflected Moscow's intention to destabilize Ukrainian defense depth by seizing terrain of both symbolic and logistical value. According to a Defense Ministry overview, the Chassivar corridor remained one of the most intensively contested zones of the Eastern Front. The moment the assault began, the attackers met a lethal first obstacle, a minefield. The lead APC struck a mine, lost traction and control, sliding to the roadside and halting the advance. Within seconds, a Ukrainian anti-tank team equipped with the relocated Javelin system fired a direct hit on the second APC, detonating its turret and halting the column's momentum. This initial setback forced the Russian force into reactive rather than proactive posture. OSINT footage later verified multiple wrecked vehicles and secondary blasts caused by onboard ammunition cook-offs. Immediately following the mine and missile strikes, Ukrainian FPV first-person view drones entered the fray. These small, agile craft swooped over the stalled column, identifying targets and diving in to initiate destruction of remaining vehicles. Observers described the sequence as a mechanized ambush in depth. Mines stopped the first vehicles, javelins eliminated the main threat, and drones exploited the chaos for follow-on strikes. The coordinated use of unmanned systems and anti-armor weapons pushed the entire assault to collapse before it could gain foothold in the zone. This layered defense proved decisive. With the Russian line broken, Ukrainian artillery units and cluster munition systems were activated. Shells rained down on any surviving armor or infantry formations still attempting to regroup. The industrial terrain of Chassivar, with its warehouses, silos, and narrow roads, became a death trap. Russian vehicles attempting to maneuver between buildings found themselves exposed to artillery strikes and drone identification. One Ukrainian brigade spokesperson later noted that the attackers never regained cohesion once the first 2 APCs were destroyed. An important detail emerges in the scale of losses inflicted. According to mapping and geolocated visual data, at least 5 Russian armored vehicles were destroyed in the initial wave, and dozens of support vehicles were either disabled or abandoned. While exact numbers remain independently unverifiable, the pattern aligns with previous engagements around Chassivar, where Russian mechanized formations suffered heavy attrition. This battle demonstrates several key lessons about modern warfare. First, frontal mechanized assaults without sufficient suppression of mines and drones are highly vulnerable. Second, the effective integration of mines, anti-tank missiles, drones, and artillery can convert a defender into an ambusher. Third, terrain matters. Industrial zones invite confusion and channel movement into kill zones when defenders anticipate advance routes. In this case, Ukrainian defense planners turned the industrial terrain of Chassivar into a zone of layered destruction rather than a mere fallback. The attackers paid dearly for pressing forward. In strategic terms, the failure of this assault underscored Russia's dilemma on the Eastern Front. Despite massing vehicles and infantry, the attacking force could not penetrate a well-prepared defense network. The result? Time, armor, and manpower spent with no meaningful territorial gain. For Ukraine, the victory was not simply in repelling an attack, but in validating a defense model that emphasizes depth, integration, and innovation. More importantly, the message to Western analysts and military planners is clear. High-end tanks and mechanized thrusts still matter, but only when paired with intelligent defense architectures and unmanned systems. As night fell on mid-October, the smoke rose over the factories of Chassivar. The Russian column lay in ruins, its advance halted, its hope of quick victory extinguished. For the defenders watching from reinforced positions, The moment offered both relief and proof. The new battlefield belongs not just to number and firepower, but to tactics built around precision, agility, and anticipation. Transitioning from the open assault at Chassivar, the war moved into an even more hidden arena. Soon after the failed mechanized push at Chassivar, Russian infantry units began to regroup by slipping into underground pipelines and technical corridors beneath the factory district. These hidden routes offered protection from artillery and drones operating above ground. However, Ukrainian forces quickly adapted to this shift in tactics. Ukrainian drone operators deployed first-person view FPV craft deep into these subterranean spaces, using small drone models equipped with cameras and explosives. Pilots controlled the drones via live video feed and navigated tunnels once thought out of reach for unmanned systems. One field report noted that what used to be safe for the enemy now became a hunting ground. This marks a significant change in how warfare is done. Footage captured in the Donetsk sector shows FPV drones entering pipeline systems under cover of darkness, locating Russian infantry positions and triggering internal collapses. In one clip, a drone penetrated a junction chamber, the explosion causing a ceiling collapse and entombing the enemy inside. Analysts describe the scene as proof that the underground spaces no longer guarantee shelter. The kill chain had moved from open ground into confined chambers where drones become the predator. On the flatter terrain near Pokrovsk and beyond, FPV drones did not slacken their pace. Ukrainian operators targeted immobilized Russian armored personnel carriers and tanks that had been stopped by mines or mechanical failure. In one documented event, a turret was observed flying several meters into the air after a drone-delivered munition struck its roof. That moment became emblematic of how small unmanned systems can inflict dramatic damage on major weapon systems. This wave of drone attacks changed the psychological balance on the front. Russian crews, trained to fear anti-tank missiles and mines, now had to worry about drones that could appear quietly, strike, and then vanish before a response could come. The sense of universal vulnerability grew. Ukrainian commanders later admitted that drone strikes now account for the majority of vehicle kills in their sector, emphasizing how decisive unmanned systems have become. Importantly, the campaign shows how the sensor-to-shooter cycle has been compressed. A drone or reconnaissance team spots a target, an FPV drone engages, and the target is destroyed, all in the space of minutes or even seconds. The layers of detection, decision, and destruction have merged into one swift sequence. For example, a mine stops an APC, drone strikes it moments later, artillery rains in, and the convoy collapses, all before reinforcements can emerge. The implications are profound for conventional armor and mechanized units. Tanks and APCs no longer only face missiles and explosive charges from known vectors. They face drones that exploit cover, attack from above or behind, and strike when defensive orchestration is slow. One defense technology review noted that Ukraine plans to purchase millions of FPV drones in 2025, reflecting how central those systems have become. As the sky and subsurface both became contested domains, the battlefield expanded beyond what frontline maps show. The fight beneath the ground turned into a war zone, and ground vehicles became part of that contested space too. Russian forces, relying on underground shelters and pipelines for protection, found themselves exposed to an enemy that could reach them inside. Ukrainian drone crews exploited that vulnerability with growing confidence. In essence, what we observe at this stage is not merely the use of drones, but the transformation of warfare's geometry. The battleground now covers the open field, the industrial block, and the subterranean corridor. At each layer, Ukrainian forces have adapted, turning what was once sanctuary into hunting grounds and forcing the enemy to pay a higher and higher price for every advance. And while Pokrovsk and Chassivar turned into laboratories of drone warfare, the northern front near Kupansk was becoming a graveyard for armored vehicles. In late October 2025, The front around Kupiansk in northern Ukraine turned into a stark example of mechanized warfare's growing vulnerability. Russian BMP infantry fighting vehicles advanced through open fields toward Ukrainian defensive lines, but instead of achieving a breakthrough, they entered dense mine belts planted earlier by defenders and found themselves under relentless fire from multiple angles. According to the Institute for the Study of War, Russian mechanized assaults in that sector lost momentum and cohesion under such pressure. As this advance slowed, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and drones picked off the stragglers. One dramatic incident involved a Russian tank that stalled mid-road after mechanical failure. A recovery vehicle arrived to haul it out, but both the tank and its escort were hit by successive drone strikes before assistance could extract them. This event underlines how recovery operations themselves became targets. Satellite imagery later confirmed several burned-out hulls in the same corridor, matching Ukrainian claims of at least 5 vehicles neutralized in the Kupiansk advance. The pattern repeated in adjacent sectors. Mechanized formations pushed forward without adequate air defense cover or mine-clearing units, and thus exposed themselves to a layered kill chain. The first layer: minefields that stopped vehicles. The second: drone surveillance and strike. The third: indirect fire from artillery or cluster munitions that poured into the disrupted column. In each instance, the attacking force lost operational tempo, meaning their ability to keep moving, adapting, and fighting effectively degraded significantly. Morale among Russian crews and supporting units also took a hit. Units that expected to roll into forward positions instead found themselves parked in kill zones, waiting for rescue or cover that never came. One battlefield analyst described the effect this way: "The spear has been replaced by the trap." For Ukraine, the success in the Kupiansk corridor did not just stop ground gains. It drained the attackers' ability to mount further mechanized thrusts in that region this winter. From a strategic viewpoint, the Kupiansk example illustrated how mass armor without sufficient reconnaissance, air defense, and unmanned system countermeasures becomes a liability rather than an advantage. The Russians still committed large vehicle formations, but each lost vehicle represented not only material cost, but time lost and psychological edge ceded. The fact that multiple vehicles were destroyed while recovery assets were also taken out shows how the modern battlefield punishes rigidity and poor adaptation. In sum, by the end of October in the Kupiansk sector, the outcome was undeniable. The Russian thrusts had failed. Yet the deeper significance lies in how the failure unfolded. It was not simply that the tanks could not reach their destination. It was that they moved into a network of detection and destruction built by the defender. The narrative of unstoppable mechanized advance has been challenged. The age of the armored spearhead is increasingly giving way to the age of the layered trap. By late October, the outcome was undeniable. Every Russian thrust along these axes had failed. But beneath the tactical details lay a deeper message about the state of modern warfare. In October 2025, the battles around Pokrovsk, Chassivar, and Kupiansk did more than stop Russia's advance. They rewrote the rules of modern war. Moscow's heavy armor met a defense built on precision and technology, where drones, javelins, and digital command networks outpaced brute force. Ukrainian units used Western tanks and domestic UAVs not just to survive, but to dominate, proving that speed of adaptation now decides victory. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War confirmed that Russian offensives in these sectors failed to achieve any strategic gain despite heavy equipment losses. As winter closes in, one fact is clear: Russia's old strategy is breaking, and Ukraine's intelligent battlefield is rising in its place. Now, if you want to keep following every key moment of this conflict, subscribe to Military Force for our next frontline analysis.